Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Kickoff Podcast. I'm your host, Alan Frankel. Today, we have a very special guest. I've been watching his videos to even prepare for this show. So you're going to get both of our sides of the story. I'm on with the Backseat Scout. That's his handle on Substack and on YouTube. He did a really great job analyzing the upcoming draft class, receivers, running backs. But today, we're going to be covering the quarterbacks. And I'm just really thrilled to have you on. How you doing, Backseat Scout?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. And just super excited to talk about these quarterbacks. I feel like there's been a lot back and forth with rankings lately, so excited to talk about them a little bit more.
Yeah, same. I think just kind of a few comments just like on the draft itself. I think one of the hard things about analyzing the quarterback position is that we really want everyone to succeed. We kind of want to feel that way. Maybe some people have some strong feelings like he's not a good quarterback, and I understand that. But for the most part, we want to talk ourselves into players. And I think with every class, you want to see kind of the optimism and be a part of the, okay, he's going to work out if he can figure this out and the potential. And I think the hardest thing about this class for me was to figure out where do they stand in the broader quarterback landscape outside of just this year's draft. So are they like, if they're the third best in this draft, where do they stack up compared to other prospects from other drafts? Instead of just kind of say, oh, he's number 3. So if he's third in this class or fourth in this class, he must be really good, or something like that. Like I've just found myself really grappling with that issue of how do I feel these quarterbacks are in the broader quarterback landscape as opposed to just this draft. It's something I've really struggled with, especially with some of the middle to lower tier guys.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I feel like it's very similar to the 2022 draft when we had guys like Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, Sam Howell. Like a lot of these guys, it's kind of the same thing where like someone's a QB3 in that class, but did that really mean anything? So that's where it's really hard to, like you said, be able to figure out, okay, where are these guys actually going to work in the NFL? And like you said, what types of schemes do they fit in? Where are their deficits? Are those deficits easy to overcome with some NFL coaching? Or is it something that this is always probably going to be a major roadblock for them?
Yeah, I agree exactly with what you're saying. Malik is also a very special case to me. I was a big Malik Willis fan. And I stick with my guys. It's one thing that people know throughout sports, good, bad, or ugly. I stick with my players, especially the prospects I like. And when he was on Tennessee, I was getting so much garbage from my friends. You, Malik Willis fan, you don't know what you're talking about. And then, suddenly he ends up on Green Bay and all he does is win games. You got to stick with your position long-term because, one team thinks X of a player, another team thinks Y, different schemes and styles. And I think that's also part of it is that, we try to fit, we think, oh, if he was in this scheme, maybe it would work better. Maybe yes, maybe no. There's a lot of fun speculation you can have about the potential of this class. And I'm sure we're going to cover a bunch of that today.
Yeah, no, and quick shout out to Malik Willis. As a Packers fan, I got to thank him for saving our season this year. So happy your guy got us through. But yeah, and I think that's the thing that is always the underrated part because we try to view quarterbacks as much in a vacuum during the draft process as possible, but scheme, fit, and just overall supporting cast is so important. Like he likely was never going to be that great of a player, but Zach Wilson is a great example where he went to go basically and was fed to the wolves with that offensive line in New York, where he just had no chance to be able to survive pressure, didn't have the greatest receiving cast to be able to help with that. And then even before him, Sam Darnold's probably even a better example where Darnold just struggled for so many years. Now he goes to Minnesota, much different situation. Now they're talking about in some places that want to try to give him a possible contract extension. So there's a lot that goes into the quarterback position that I think is a reason why there's such a high miss rate with quarterbacks, and it's why it's so difficult for teams to try to find one. So yeah, I think there's so much that goes into it that it's always worth having a good discussion.
In terms of Malik, and I'll stick with him because I was really following his career closely. I heard on a different show, I think it was the RSP, and actually commented on their YouTube channel regarding this. He's like, well, the Packers saved Malik Willis. And I'm like, well, Malik Willis obviously had some sort of skills that made the Packers think, oh, he might be a good player. And you're going to get to this point when we talk about Jalen Milroe, just to tease a little bit here. When you talk about Jalen Milroe, that's going to be a big thing that's going to come up in the conversation in that when a player's career gets salvaged, maybe a Sam Darnold who ended up in San Francisco or a Malik Willis who's starting to have some sort of potential, it's because teams looked at two teams looked at the same player and saw two different things. And I think that's something which I really enjoyed about the Malik Willis adventure, was that people were all saying, oh, well, now he's in QB heaven, so now he's playing well. And I'm like, well, there's a reason why QB heaven wanted him in the first place. So there's kind of a push-pull there on like when the system saves the quarterback or when the quarterback is in the right system. There's sort of a jigsaw puzzle there that goes both ways. And when it was said on the show, on the RSP show, and I was like, well, Malik definitely got saved by Green Bay, meaning maybe nobody else would have gotten him. But I was like, I think a lot of the things that I saw from Malik in college are the reason why they went after Malik in the NFL after he failed in Tennessee. Same thing with Darnold in San Francisco, and we've seen Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. We've seen a few different players kind of fit this mold of the reclamation quarterback. I guess the most famous one, probably Rich Gannon, would probably be one of the most successful ones. Maybe there's another, but Rich Gannon's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and I think the big thing too is for the coaching staff, not only to see, like you said, they might see a different player and like different strengths they want to lean on, but to really go in and leverage those strengths. Like it's really easy to just for a coach to want to run their system. They have a plan of what they want to do, how they want to run their offense. And that's just not always possible with every quarterback. Ideally, that's what you want. And I think the NFL is an interesting place because we talk a lot about player development, but I think a lot of coaches want to run their system nowadays with so many offensive-minded coordinators and coaches now in the league, where we kind of lose a little bit of player development. So when you have like a Matt LaFleur that can recognize a player's strengths, recognize how to maximize those strengths, and really be able to put them in a position to succeed, I think that's when we get a situation like we have with Malik Willis this year.
Yeah, 100%. I think, where players are going to end up and their position to succeed is huge. It's what I think about it is that these teams need to have a plan for their quarterbacks. I personally don't like having the quarterback start day one. You brought up Zach Wilson, and I was like, they named him the day one starter. I'm like, that's stupid. Why are you putting that much pressure on this kid? Like, first of all, if you just say, hey, we're giving him the backup role to start, he gets to see what live fire looks like, and you're putting less pressure on him to be the immediate savior. He may be the savior a year from now, but the immediate savior, that's a lot of pressure to put on a young kid. It's just, I never liked it. I was very happy when the Browns didn't do that with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, another one of my guys. Me and my buddy from Cleveland still talk about Baker, and we're just like, the Browns just botched that. And, it's just funny. This is why it's fun to stick with your positions instead of, going with the wind. It's more fun to actually, and sometimes you're going to be wrong, but it's more fun to stick with your guys and follow their full adventure kind of through the NFL landscape.
Yeah, no, and to your point with not starting quarterbacks right away, I feel like that's my biggest thing I would probably say to NFL coaches for this quarterback class is a lot of these quarterbacks are likely not going to be ready day one, and that there's going to need to be some patience. And at least with some of the mock drafts I've been seeing of how high some of these quarterbacks are being projected, I'm not sure if that's the plan for a lot of these quarterbacks. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out with a lot of these guys.
100%. And getting into how things are going to play out, let's bring on our number one quarterback, I think, for both of us on the board. It's Cam Ward. Backseat Scout, what are the things that stand out to you about Cam Ward? What do you like about him?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that jumps out with him in a class where there's not a lot of great arm talent, he has one of the most talented arms, both from just an arm strength standpoint and also just release angles, different diverse arm angles he can throw at. Like, he has one of the most elastic and flexible arms I think we see in the class. And at least in terms of being able to throw the ball accurately, we definitely have some other players with good arm talent, maybe not as quite as accurate as we can see, at least with this Cam Ward's platform charting here. But he's just has a lot of natural talent. And the really special thing has been really great to be able to see with him is he's started all the way at like the FCS level and slowly worked his way up to being with Miami and then being a Heisman Trophy finalist. So he's put in the work to not only have that talent, but also match it with awareness of how to play the game. His accuracy has gotten better every year. His presence in the pocket has gotten better. He still definitely has his moments where he goes a little bit crazy in terms of what he's trying to do and what he tries to pull off. But at the same time, he is able to follow through on a lot of those, which adds that wild card factor to him that a lot of players just aren't able to play out of structure like he can. So he still definitely needs to find that balance, but I think it's getting blown out of proportion a little bit with him in terms of finding that balance since he's gotten better and gotten a lot more control. But I think that's just as me as watched him all the way at Washington State slowly improve and just see that progression that I feel confident, at least with him, getting that good balance to be able to be a playmaker, but also not turn the ball over.
Yeah, so Cam, his arm strength is definitely something which I like in terms of his ability to get to see it and throw it quickly. He can really get the ball out fast. Some people don't like his low motion, but what I think about him is, my player comp for him is actually Steve McNair. He reminds me a lot of the way he throws in terms of how fast the ball can get to the outside of the field with quick and powerful lasers. Like the way I describe it in my notes is the ball is just see it, throw it really, really fast. And the other thing that I think stands out to me about Ward, which I didn't quite see with the other players in the class, and once again, these are subjective judgments. Other people might say differently. But I think he had the most anticipation and control at the line of scrimmage in terms of which receiver is the number one option on a given play. He was reading the defense from the start in terms of, okay, this is how I'm doing it. This is what I want to do. Based on how I'm seeing the defense, this is going to be the best available receiver on this play. And I think he's actually playing with great anticipation. And I think that anticipation trickles down into his footwork and his decisiveness. So when we talk about like a quick release, to me, sometimes it's the ball just coming out fast, the ball coming out on time. And I think a lot of that has to do with his command of the line of scrimmage. With the other quarterbacks, I kind of felt like they were just following the play. With Cam, I really felt like he was making a lot of independent and aggressive decisions at the line of scrimmage. And not aggressive like, oh, I'm throwing it deep, but aggressive in terms of, okay, I know what I want to do. I'm locked in. He kind of had another attention to detail gear out there in terms of awareness and who he is on the football field. He just had another level to me compared to the other quarterbacks in this class. And I think it shows on his quick trigger and his ability to just get the ball to the open man very, very, very quickly and decisively. The other thing that I think with him is that sometimes he has these two different gears where he can be lazy Cam and engaged Cam. And sometimes his footwork gets a little bit lazy when he's not. Maybe it's a drive, they're up by 10, he doesn't care as much. Or for whatever reason, he undersells the opponent. He just doesn't think the opponent can stop him. So he doesn't hit that level of attention gear. And when he doesn't hit that gear mentally, I could see like he relaxes. He's a little lazy on his throws. He's on his back foot. To me, if he can keep that like top end, I want to be here, kind of, he's like the predator on the field. And like, he's the guy who's going to attack. When he's in attack mode, I know that's like a basketball statement when guys dribble to the rim, but when he's in attack mode and he is really looking to push an offense down the field, he's really, really tough because of how fast and his tempo is. When he gets to the line, the ball comes out, boom, 8-yard completion, boom, 12-yard completion, boom, 21-yard completion. Like it just goes really, really fast and has a lot of rhythm. But when he's a little bit lazier, that he can kind of be a little bit like lacking that energy. Sometimes I saw that with Joe Flacco in Baltimore, actually. And I know they're very different style quarterbacks. One of them is a shorter guy, throws more horizontal. The other guy is more of a 6'5" deep thrower. But I'm not comparing their builds. I'm comparing their kind of on and off switch. And both of them kind of seem to have a little bit of that in them. And I think that when Cam is really locked in, he's very tough. He's very tough to slow down.
Yeah, and I think I even saw some of what you mentioned with that, like even in like the way he handles himself in the pocket, like when teams aren't getting a rush on him and they just send like 4 guys at him, just have him sit in the pocket. It feels like he can kind of get into like a little bit of a lull, be a little bit too casual, kind of like you mentioned. But I feel like when they got the blitz on, then he would actually like adjust, and at least from what I saw, was very successful against blitzes and pressure. So in a way, it's almost a way to kind of get him into a spot where he's getting a little bit too relaxed to be able to beat him that way. And I think to your point with him playing with great anticipation, I think that's a really underrated part with a lot of these quarterbacks nowadays, just with how all the transfer portal stuff, the NIL, is we have all these quarterbacks bouncing around. So when you have a quarterback like Cam Ward be able to come into a new program, throw with the anticipation that he did, make plays or make calls from the line of scrimmage like he could, and his first year at the program is incredibly impressive, because ultimately all these guys are going to be going to brand new teams, brand new systems. So you need to have at least some ability to be able to do that. So even though we have some guys that were able to do that, they were there. Some of them were there for like multiple years. So it's kind of a little bit easier to do it that way. But the guys that can do it with going to a brand new spot is something that should hopefully hold up well in the NFL.
Yeah, I like him for the pros just because I like his command of the line of scrimmage. The reason why I like the McNair comp is because McNair always had a great leadership presence about him. His teams always seem to play with a certain level of urgency. And that's something I see with Cam, that similar style. It's just ironic because, the Titans are drafting number one. And, I came to the McNair comparison very independent. I actually didn't at the time realize that it was the Titans who had the number one pick. But the more I watch McNair, I went back and I watched like the Super Bowl against the Rams and things like that. The more I saw the similarities in terms of the command, the quickness, and the intelligent mobility, I just think that he sometimes is in sync with the game in a way that the other quarterbacks in this class are not. And that's really why he's my number one guy. The arm talent, I like. I like the quick trigger. I like that stuff. But the thing that really separates him to me from this class is his full and active participation in the whole game, from the pre-snap to the post snap to the mobility. He just seems to be a little bit more in sync. One of the evaluations I always do on players is, are they ahead of the game? Are they at the game speed, or are they behind game speed? And Cam Ward seems to be, in general, decisively ahead of the game speed. He is playing in front of the game. He's seeing what's going to happen a little bit before it happens. And because he does that, he's able to pivot quickly. And it helps his mobility as well, because he knows where the gaps are going to be, where the space is. And he seems to process that very well in terms of, where he moves in the pocket. He just intelligently picks up a few yards here and there, moves over to the side. And it's because he's in sync with the pass rush and I would say the spacing of the field. He just seems to have a good sense of all those things. And I really think that, on top of his arm talent, which I think is very good, I think it's above average arm talent. I don't think it's as great as other people think it is. I think he's good. I think he's above average, but he doesn't strike me as like a Stafford, a Mahomes, whether in terms of arm strength or in terms of, we'll call it arm flexibility. I think he's got a lot of things there. It's not that he doesn't have a great arm or anything like that. He's got a good enough arm, maybe I'd say an above average arm for what we're looking for. But the part of his game that gets me excited is his command of the line of scrimmage, clear command of the playbook, and leadership. I didn't see that really from the other quarterbacks in this class, alongside the accuracy. You've got the accuracy chart up here. So, he made a lot of different throws, a lot of good throws. But the thing that I think just puts him that notch above is that presence in the pocket and in the huddle. I could just see it oozing off of him and the players responding to it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's where at least a lot of that presence and awareness with a lot of those like minor, like small details that like we've kind of seen that with a lot of quarterbacks lately, where COVID led to a lot of these older quarterbacks going into the draft, players staying even longer in school. I mean, Tyler Shuck is, I think, going to be 26 by the start of the year. So we have some really old players in some of these classes, but we've also kind of seen like how beneficial sometimes that extra year, extra 2 years in school can be for, especially Cam Ward. Like I did his full scouting report last January because he had declared for the draft and then he decided he wanted to return to school. And thank goodness he did, because at least it was night and day in terms of my eval. Like I had him as a lower, like as a backup quarterback at best, not even like a good backup quarterback compared to his 2023 film. So just getting to the level he did in just that short amount of time and at a new program is incredibly impressive. And like you said, just seeing like all the minor things that he's able to like fine tune that, like, again, a lot of the other quarterbacks just haven't really quite shown just yet.
All right. So in terms of where you have him going in the draft, do you anticipate the Titans trading him, trading the pick to get him, I should say, or do you think that the Titans are gonna take him?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because it really depends on what the Titans' plan is. Because I think they have two routes they can go. They could say, we did try to go a little bit all in last year. We got some free agents. We made some trades. I know they kind of backed off on a lot of those. So maybe if they say, our window is not yet, let's build a foundation. Let's build more of our like core team and then bring a quarterback in another year or two. I think they could look to trade down and try to take advantage and try to build more draft capital. But if they think, we have a good enough squad, we just didn't have the right guy at the quarterback, maybe they do go for Cam. If I was the Titans, I do like Cam. I think he'll be a very good NFL quarterback. But at the end of the day, I think if you don't have a good foundation for him, I do worry that he could regress to some of his Washington State play where he was a little bit all over the place, making bad decisions, getting really rattled. So I just worry about kind of almost having like what happened with Caleb Williams, where we have a good player go to a situation that seems solid, but then falls apart quickly and the quarterback suffers developmentally from it. So I think they probably would be in their best interest to try to build up a foundation before then. But again, I couldn't blame them if they feel that he's the guy that could take them to the next level.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes down to like, what would you want for him in a trade? So just for fun, I have a lot of Giants fans who listen to my show. So we'll do the Giants as an example. What would you, just off the top of your head, what would the package? This is a general package. You don't have to be like specific how many, but like, what would be the general package you would want from the Giants to move down to 3? If you
So just to move down 2 spots, I have to look exactly what picks the Titans have, but I would imagine it'd probably take at least like their 2025 second, potentially 2025 or 2026 second. I don't know if you could get a first out of them for just 2 spots. I don't think this quarterback class is good enough to be able to get that out of them, especially since the Giants could probably look at Titans and be like, hey, we know like you're probably not going to, if you're looking to trade down, you're probably not going to take a quarterback. So we'll just take a chance that he'll be there, kind of like the Texans did with Stroud a couple of years ago when they played chicken and won. But I think it probably wouldn't be a huge package, which again, if you think Ward is the way to go, at least then it's easier to justify because you're probably not going to get a huge haul. But at the same time, I think the Titans have a lot of holes right now. So any extra picks that they can get would help in the long run.
So I'm inclined to put the price a little bit higher. I don't think the Titans should accept, there's going to be the swap, obviously, from 1 to 3. So that's, you get the swap, and then you have, I wouldn't accept anything less than at least another first-round pick. I need at least 1 first-round pick. I need at least probably a 1, and then at least a 2 or a 3. Like I need at least, I can't justify not having a first-round pick in this trade. If they try to do anything less, I'm out. If they offer a different player, maybe if they wanted to offer one of the younger players, maybe I could consider it. But I would not give up Cam Ward for anything less than an additional first as the headliner of the package. Maybe there and a few other pieces there, but I can't imagine them moving down. To me, I think Cam Ward is going to be a quality NFL quarterback. I think he has what I'm looking for. He's not going to score a 10. This isn't a 10. This is more like I would say out of 10, how would I rate Cam? Maybe like an 8.3. 8.3 in terms of like, I think he could be an 8.3 starter in the NFL out of 10. So I don't see him being like a Lamar or a Mahomes, but maybe like maybe like 2 rungs below or a rung below that. And I think that's good enough to consistently, be in the mix for the playoffs, and then with a good team, be a Super Bowl kind of contender, at least in the championship game, be in the mix. So I kind of view him as like an 8.3 out of 10 as a quarterback prospect. And I think that justifies at least an additional first-round pick. I can tell you right now, if they offered me another first and a third, I don't think I would take it if I was Tennessee. If that's a swap of first and a third. So I think that kind of closes the book on Cam Ward. I think we kind of, covered him pretty thoroughly there. Who do you want to bring up next?
Yeah, I think since we're looking at the top of the class, we can also kind of start talking about Shedeur Sanders next, if that sounds good to you.
Shedeur is great. So what are your thoughts on Shedeur?
Yeah, so at least I think it's interesting. So during the season, I feel like I was one that was a little bit lower on Shedeur, at least by the midway point of the season. I personally recognized that that at least I felt that Cam Ward made himself clearly the starter or the top quarterback for the class. And at least with Shedeur, I felt like, probably QB2 still solid player, but I'm not sure if he has enough of those extra level of play that he can do to be able to separate himself from Cam Ward and get above him. And now I feel like things have kind of shifted where now people are a little bit almost too low on Sanders, where I'm trying to pull up his chart here. One moment.
Yeah, sure.
But I feel like at least with Sanders, like his accuracy, I feel like has kind of gotten lost in a lot of the discussion with him. I think he's easily one of, if not the most accurate quarterback in this class. I think a lot of people kind of look at the offense as there's a lot of short passes. So is this really something that is translatable to the NFL? But I think it is something where, finally I was able to get it up. So at least with his passing charting, which by the way, at least for background people, so like this isn't like completions per this area. This is like passing, like accuracy charting. So is the ball like dead on in that area? So there's like you can complete the ball to the pass catcher, but is there actually like a very catchable ball where it's exactly where it should be? At least with Sanders, like most, if not all the areas are like great that he targets. He's good in the short, medium, intermediate, and even pretty solid in the deep. And at least with him, he shows so much awareness for being able to know exactly where to pinpoint the ball, to be able to not only get his pass catcher open, but also protect him from a hit that is lost to a lot of these quarterbacks who are just more focused on how do I get this ball to him, not how do I get this ball to him cleanly for him to also pick up yards after the catch. And I think the other thing that people are kind of missing with Sanders right now is, again, he is in kind of a weird offense, but when things break down, he shows a really good awareness of how to move to his next through his progressions, how to find a guy while he's scrambling and trying to make a play that I think is kind of getting, again, lost in the shuffle. He definitely has his limitations. Like we can kind of even see with his arm strength limitations with the yellow deep areas that like his deep ball accuracy can kind of wane. You can kind of see the velocity for his throws also kind of not quite be there when you compare to like a throw from Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, some of these stronger arm quarterbacks. But it's still fine. I think people are trying to really underplay because I think we went also into the season where there was for some reason a lot of talk that Shedeur Sanders had like a cannon for an arm, which I don't know where that came from. I never really saw that. But now I think we're kind of going a little bit too far on the other side where we're looking at, okay, he has just barely any arm strength. And I don't know. I think we're just kind of overreacting a little bit for him.
I think the hardest thing about Shedeur was that everybody kind of expected him to be a little bit like his dad in terms of an elite, freaky athlete, and he actually isn't. He's much more of a traditional quarterback. I kind of refer to him as the black-white quarterback. He's kind of reminds me of what the old quarterbacks used to be like in the NFL. I just a very polished version. It's really fascinating to watch him. I've been incredibly divided on how I feel because I think that somewhere there's going to be a quarterback coach that watches his tape and be like, this is the guy. He's so clean. He follows the plays. He does his reads. He generally hits the open man if he's available, if it's the first option. Sometimes he sees the next guy who's open, but he's not physically quite there yet in terms of like the arm strength and the power. Like, can he always improvise? Like, and get Nick. I feel like he doesn't have the same creativity that some of these other guys do, but he also sticks to the script really, really well. And he can run 30 plays consecutively correctly. And he's not going to make a coach look bad. And I think that his release is really clean. His timing is good on some of these, on a lot of his throws. I think that he's really divisive and a great foil for Cam Ward, whereas Cam Ward, people are going to like the improvisation, the laser arm, the kind of independent streak that Ward plays with. And some people are going to really like Shedeur and his really traditional release and his ability to just follow the plays really, really well, stay on schedule, and really just be disciplined and be willing to accept coaching. Like, I think that the coaches are really going to like Shedeur Sanders' tape because of his style just looks like somebody who was brought up to play quarterback and went to like a fancy AAU quarterback camp. His release is clean. His footwork is pretty clean, I think. Like, just watching him, he looks like an NFL quarterback. Actually, sometimes more than Ward. Ward kind of a little bit looks more playgroundy, and Shedeur looks more like the adult in the room. Like, I just see coaches gravitating to Shedeur's tape. Like on my notes here, I have like pretty quick, but not an explosive breakaway runner. He's definitely above average in terms of athlete. He does a good job of avoiding sacks and throwing the ball away. He is somebody who I saw a great presence of mind to make even tough throwaways. I really liked his ability to kind of manage the game. Like, this is when I say he's more like an old school quarterback. He manages games, I think, really, really well in terms of just the risk reward. Cam Ward had some risk reward issues. You'll see that again when we talk about Milroe. I'll bring that up. He had some risk. He has a very good risk reward balance. And I think sometimes Ward gets over aggressive and tries to show off how good of an arm he has when really he'd be better off just moving 8 yards, 10 yards at a time. Shedeur doesn't really do that. He's not going to do as many unpredictable things from the script. He's just not going to have that. He doesn't have that independent streak sort of that Ward has. It's something that also makes me question him because how are his survival skills? I feel like Ward has a certain level of survival skill in him, and he has that other gear that I'm not sure Sanders can reach. So like Shedeur is kind of like a wave, and I would say, Cam is kind of like a wave, and Shedeur is like this really straight line. And I think that a lot of teams are going to really resonate with that straight line because it's a level of consistency and it's a level of predictability that I think that he's going to bring to his teams that maybe Cam won't. And I think that's why some teams and coaching staffs are going to gravitate to Shedeur because of that polish.
Yeah, and I think Shedeur definitely is not on a level of athlete or player that he is, but it's kind of like, just as a Packers fan, kind of like with Aaron Rodgers, where Rodgers definitely could stick to a script, be able to run the offense, and would definitely like be able to provide a little bit more extra every now and then, but mostly could really play in control and just look like he was running the field at times. I think the same thing that Sanders also had, that Rodgers had too, that does make me a little worried, is just the sack issues. There's just a lot of times where Shedeur is a little bit too confident. Like you said, he's not a great athlete like his dad. So I think he kind of thinks like he's his dad. Sometimes it tries to escape pressure and then ends up taking a sack. And that's the biggest thing that just scares me, because there's so many times when the offense is running like a well-run engine, like they're picking up yards, getting first downs, and then they get to midfield, and then Shedeur takes like a 12-yard sack because he's trailing backwards, running away from the pressure. And then all of a sudden it's like 2nd and 22. What are we going to do? So, and it just happens a lot for him. I think it's definitely something where I'm not going to pretend that Colorado line was any good by any means. So that then becomes a question. Okay, if we put him behind a good offensive line, this is where, again, we kind of go back to team fit and what teams actually have a good foundation for their quarterback. If we put him in a system that has a good protection for him, be able to let him really run an offense, like, does that continue to be an issue? Because if it doesn't, then it's just really more just the physical limitations for him, since, like you said, the ability to be able to run an offense is there. So again, really just, and that could be the thing too, that just really drives where he goes, is depending on what team feels they have the best foundation for him.
Yeah, I think that which team, likes him and really wants to commit to him because they believe in that consistency and in that polish. And I think also just the fact that his dad was in the spotlight and he was in the spotlight a lot, he has a certain maturity to him that I'm not sure that the other quarterbacks are going to have. It's something that separates him. I sense that he was very calm. Just a different, like really different from Cam. Like, it's really great that they're at the top of the class or near the top of the class. You have him as the number 2, I think. You have him as your number 2 quarterback. So
yep,
I don't.
Yeah, number 2.
He's not my number 2 quarterback.
Oh,
but I see what people like about him, and for me, my concern with him is like this. I think he played pretty poorly against Nebraska and against BYU, and I think against faster NFL defenses, he might struggle tremendously. And this is kind of the downside of for me for Shedeur, is that I think that if it's not open right away, or if the other team's kind of a little bit prepared for what he's got coming, I don't see that ability to like recognize and maybe move the play over to the next option before the snap. Like, I see that with Ward a lot, where he's just like really seeing the defense and the spacing in the right way. Whereas I feel like Shedeur is kind of just running the plays. He's not necessarily in a bad way. It's just that he doesn't have the sense of urgency. And because he has that sort of template release, like a lot of his throws look very, very clean, it also shows me sometimes he's not adjusting for the situation. Like, Ward is throwing all sorts of different throws, and it's because of that anticipation and timing. So he knows the ball needs to be out now, and I've got it. However I've got to do it, I've got to do it. I've just found that Shedeur doesn't quite have that. So a lot of times, like, his throws, they look pretty, but sometimes they're just either that's too tight of a window, the defenders are too fast, and when you have like a certain cumulative defensive strength, like if you put Shedeur Sanders against an average defense, I think he plays pretty well. You put Cam against an average defense, I think they're both going to play well. But when you start talking about upper echelon defenses, I think you start to see a really decent size skill gap between Cam and Shedeur. I think that when suddenly the pressure is coming a little bit faster and the windows are a little bit smaller and you need to do a little bit more independent thinking on the field, I find that he lags behind Cam in that particular way. And that's the thing that I think is going to scare other people off. So I think coachability and that stuff is what's going to make teams like him. And I think that lack of survival instinct is what teams that kind of are against him are not going to like. And they're not going to like that he might not have the biggest arm or things like that. So I really do think that Shedeur is the most, of all the quarterbacks in the class, he's the most divisive. I think how you feel about Shedeur Sanders really shows a little bit how you feel about the quarterback position in general.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the big thing for Sanders too is I know he had Travis Hunter, but I think also a lot of the struggles against better competition just came down to Colorado just still not having that much talent at the school just yet. I mean, his number 2 receiver was probably either Will Shepherd or LeJonte Wester, which I've seen some people try to say that they're very good receivers. I'm not in that boat, at least of thinking that. I think they're average at best. So I like, at least when we compare like who Cam Ward had to work with, definitely was a better supporting cast, which again, can't use that excuse for everything, but I think that definitely played a role with some of those tougher matchups. I think part of it, not to give more excuses for Sanders, but honestly, I think for that Nebraska and BYU game, like the whole team just came out like they were sleepwalking for both games. So I think there was a little bit of like just the coaching just didn't prepare the players well enough for those situations. Which happens. I mean, it's unfortunate it happened in some of the, like 2 of their biggest matchups, but at least he looked very good in his Kansas State matchup other than like some bad sacks. So I think he does have the ability to play against good quality defense. He may not be, to your point, like be able to elevate quite as much against it as like say Cam Ward can, but I think at least as long as he has a good system around him, which again could be a limiting factor, he can at least keep an offense going.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy you're bringing that up because I think that's a very fair counterpoint in terms of talent level. Sometimes it's just you're just outmatched. I played in my own personal leagues where I played against equal level opponents and we were able to beat them. And then sometimes we played against a team that was just a little bit outside of our league and nothing to do necessarily with me. Sometimes it was my fault, but sometimes even outside of what I could control, we just didn't have much of a chance to go in. I just didn't necessarily feel like I saw the fight or the ability to like come up with ideas to improvise out of that. And that kind of bugged me a little. Like it felt like with Cam, he just, even against good quality competition, I felt like he had a chance to move the ball down the field. And maybe it's a talent level thing, but to me, like there was just a little bit more on his tape. Regarding Shedeur, in terms of him leading an elite level offense, I think it's doable in more of a Detroit style offense that relies on his decision making. And a bevy of skill players. Like he kind of projects pretty well for that type of offense. And then I think projects a little bit better for a more defensive style team, power team a little bit later on. Like once he gets his big salary, like let's assume he does well for 4 years, gets a salary. I think those later editions of Shedeur's teams would lean a lot more on his caution and decision-making and a little bit less on him trying to score 30 points a game. Like I'm trying to like project like what type of teams would I build around these guys. For Cam, I think I can probably build a high-scoring team. It doesn't necessarily have to be a deep down-the-field team, but I think that just with him, I could build some sort of high-scoring, at least horizontal, a really good horizontal offense. Like I can really see me going, 8 yards down the field. Whereas Shedeur, I kind of want to rely a little bit more on play action. I want to rely on a little bit more of varied looks. I want to let him, play within himself and then use that and hopefully have enough playmakers so that he just has to deliver the ball and then they run with it. Like when I think about Shedeur, I kind of want to run like a Tom Brady style offense, like a Wes Welker, a Julian Edelman, or other elite quickness guys that get open, so that his strengths kind of play out a bit more. So I'm trying to think about how I would accentuate his strengths, and that's kind of how I see like those teams kind of building around these 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I think to that point, you might be in line with some of the mock drafts I've seen lately, because I've seen a couple mock drafts where people have Sanders going to the Steelers, which kind of fits that to a T, with having more of a run first mentality, having a good structure with Arthur Smith, which fantasy people can hate him, but at least like as long as he's not getting his head, he can typically run a pretty good offense as a coordinator. So I think a situation like that would be like amazing for both sides if he can go to something like that.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a trade up though. Do you think that the Pittsburgh Steelers can get him outright? I think they're in the 20s somewhere. Do you think he lasts till the 20s, or do you have him potentially going a little earlier?
I really don't know where he'll go. I've seen lately mocks have been all over the place. Like I've seen him going as late in the first round now, late from some people. I've seen him still, I think in Jordan Reed's mock draft, he went still as high as the 3rd overall pick. But I personally don't view, as much as I feel like I've been defending Sanders, I don't view him as a top first round, even a middle first round type player. I view him more as like maybe a late first round player, maybe even like an early second, just from a pure talent standpoint. So, and obviously quarterbacks, like your teams are always going to reach a little bit for them because it's just such an important position. So, but I think it just comes down to probably just how desperate is the team? Are they going to take them that as high as the top 10? Are they going to say, we're just going to sit, we're going to see what happens if he falls to us. We'll go for it. If not, then we'll live another day. It just really depends, I think, kind of how the NFL decides to view this quarterback class.
I agree. Like, I'm looking at the Raiders at 6, the Saints at 9. I'm looking at the 49ers, the Dolphins, and let's see who else. The Seahawks at 18, who could be interested in him before Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh might have to trade up ahead of the Seahawks. The Seahawks feel like the type of team that might be interested in him just because I think that they're defensive, they're run by a defensive coordinator. And I think a defensive coordinator would have a pretty solid opinion of Shedeur's ability to kind of, I could see McDonald liking some things about his game. But that's already at 18. Like, I think that there's several landing spots for him. I'm sure a bunch of drafts have him going to the Raiders at 6. I feel like that's something which would be pretty common. Maybe the Jets as well. So it's interesting. I do think he would fit better on a dome team because he just doesn't have that huge arm. So that, like kind of like Matt Ryan, how Matt Ryan, like he didn't have a huge arm, but because he was in a dome, the elements weren't as big of a disadvantage. So kind of like the NFC South is a great spot for him. I kind of think he could end up going 6 to the Raiders, but there's several different landing spots in the first round where he could end up.
Yeah, and I was actually originally going to mention the Seahawks too, but they've been going through a bit of an identity crisis lately with getting rid of Lockett, potentially moving DK. So I was like, I'm not sure what their plans are, if they even want to target a quarterback with any plans to try to build one right now, just with how much they're shifting direction.
I hear you. They could just, be looking to add talent and then maybe either pick up a quarterback or be looking to draft one next year. I think that's definitely in play. If there's some sort of a tear down and restructure, that's definitely a valid path to go on.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of, I think did that close the door on Shedeur? You're good. I think we've covered it.
I was going to say, I think the internet has enough Shedeur discourse, so I think they've probably got enough of that.
All right. So who do you want to move on to next as the next quarterback?
I would really love to hear your thoughts on Jaxson Dart, because speaking of internet discourse, I feel like there has been so much talk about Dart, so I'm kind of curious where you landed on him.
So I happen to like his arm more than other people. I think he's made some really good touch throws that I look for in terms of feathering the ball over somebody, beside somebody, and into that. I also think he had nice chemistry with a lot of his receivers. I think receivers will really like to play for Jaxson Dart. I do think that the processing and the execute 30 NFL plays in a row test, a little dicier. I'm not certain I feel like he's going to be able to consistently execute pro-level strategies. I think that Sanders and Ward are a little bit ahead of him in terms of their mental acuity for the game. And it's not just because he's a big, strong, like blonde guy. This is based on the fact that I feel like he's just running the plays, but he's not. I like some of his improvisational stuff more so than I think he's kind of moving people around at the line, maybe making like really great like anticipation throws that are independent minded. I find him he's sticking to the script, but he's also able to make some really, really great throws. I think some of his throws stand out as the best in terms of some of his throws are as good as Cam Ward's throws. Some of them are really, really great in terms of getting the ball over and into people. Like that's the thing that I have in my notes here is like he has really soft touch and makes some of the throws that are best in the class. And that touch is what's going to be the thing that drives scouts towards him. And it's not the power. I think like people always get obsessed with like arm power. To me, it's actually that ability to put it between defenders into a receiver or over a defender and into a receiver. I think that's the part of it that really gets me excited about him is he's shown some of that high level throwing ability, which scouts and which other, especially fans on YouTube, tend to love to point out.
Yeah, I was going to say that is the difficult thing with Dart, because like you said, I think, and that's the reason why I think there's a lot of very strong fans in his camp is whether it's highlights, watching him in game, or just anything like those throws like really stick out. And like you said, when you compare him to the other top quarterbacks, like you can see a very easy argument where it's like, oh yeah, he has the talent of like, say, a Cam Ward, or the throwing accuracy of Shedeur Sanders. Like there's a lot of talent there. And then, but like you said, that processing is such a big question mark for him, especially just coming from Lane Kiffin's offense. At least for people that aren't aware, don't follow college football too much, Lane Kiffin's offense is really difficult to get an evaluation of for quarterbacks. It has it's a huge focus on play action. At least for a standard NFL offense, usually play action is done at a rate of like low 20s. Ole Miss, at least last year, was at like 52%, I believe. So what that does is that gets linebackers crashing in, gets safeties biting, opens up a lot of those alleys for Dart to be able to throw a ball into the medium areas of the field. So, which he still gets a lot of credit for being able to complete those throws, and he has the accuracy to do that consistently. But it also just makes it a lot easier. And there's a lot of just all his reads are on one side of the field. So obviously, like, he has to go through like kind of like the layering process progressions where it's like, okay, is my intermediate player open? Is my short player open? But there's not like moving his eyes around the field like you see with a lot of other quarterbacks that is needed in the NFL. And I think that processing is just the biggest thing that NFL teams and coaches just really need to figure out, like where he's actually at.
Yeah, so a couple other things about him in terms of the play action. That's how I have in my notes. I'm like, this guy seems born to be in a Shanahan like play action style scheme. The thing I really liked about him was he seemed to be throwing his receivers into good yak situations. I feel like Watkins was running all over the field. Harris was going all over the field. And Watkins and Harris are very different receivers. So I like that he was able to build a good chemistry with both of those guys. It just felt like he was just really much in rhythm with his guys there. And, building rapport with your receivers is an important element in the pro game. And I just felt like the receivers just like to play for him. They just seem to have a good excitement and energy on that offense. Like sometimes you could see like offensive units, like sometimes it's just the quarterback leading and everyone following, but Dart and his receivers seem to like really have a good time out there. They really seem to enjoy playing with each other. And Trey Harris is one of my favorite receivers in this draft. And I really enjoyed watching them play together. And I just think that he does do some things in terms of his receivers that stood out to me, like from a yak perspective. Other things that I had about him was that he can run the option a little bit. He's someone who has a little bit of running to his game. Like, I don't really think Shedeur is going to be running the option. He's just too skinny, and I just don't want him taking that many hits. Maybe he can run a few plays per game, but Dart has kind of the heft to run what I call like the big, thick option, like what they ran with Daniel Jones sometimes in New York to pick up some yards. He does have that in him, and that's kind of another piece of maybe it's play action with a little bit of option and a little bit of RPO, just because he did show the ability to run for some yards at the college level. So not like a speed option like with Lamar where you're terrified he's going to run for 60 yards, but someone who can pick up some decent first downs, pick up some decent yards on the ground. I wouldn't say necessarily high volume, but you could run it to him, 3 to 5 times a game. I think if you wanted to have him make option reads, I think he could do it. And I think that is going to appeal to some coaches who are like, okay, we can run play action, but we can also run some option concepts alongside of that. There's a little bit of breadth to his game because I could see him being able to throw it down the field a little bit in the intermediate, run the ball a little bit. His path to being a good pro has it's generally play action based, but I think it also he's able to run some of these like little, like, I wouldn't call them gimmicky. I would call them a little bit more basic advantage based offenses like the option and spread.
Yeah. And I think also to circle back to your point of like the players liking Dart a lot, I think there's been a lot of accounts that Dart has been doing. It does have a lot of good character and has been well liked by team coaches. And that stuff, like, I'm a grumpy old man, so I kind of downplay it a little bit, but that stuff does matter. Like it does, especially when you're building like a profile for a player in this process. Like like you said, with the accuracy, the ability to scramble, the arm talent, and then also passing the character test, like that all kind of does add up to where a team feels comfortable going after a player like him. I think at least for that, you mentioned the Shanahan offense. I think the biggest thing with the Shanahan offense compared to like the Lane Kiffin offense is the play action in Shanahan's offense are more of like under center play action to be able to also have a run pretty easy and up the like in the tackles and outside zones. But for Lane Kiffin's offense is more of like read option, play action, wide zones, where we're not doing as many snaps under center, which we saw him try to do at the Senior Bowl. And I think he did have a lot of fumbles under center, which, I mean, he didn't do a whole lot of snaps under center. So I would kind of expect him to have some trouble. I'm not going to overblow it and say, oh, he can't take snaps under center. Like, it's a learning process. The Senior Bowl is the reps are there for them to practice, get more training in. Like, it's going to be part of, like, you're not going to get it down right away. So, but it is something that he does have to get more comfortable with, doing those under center snaps if he is going to go to Shanahan like offense. And also just, of course, just working through the reads, doing the full field scans, and just being able to be more confident when things break down. Because that's my biggest thing, is his pressure, like his success against pressure and blitz is really troublesome, especially against better competition. Like, he will at times just freeze under pressure. And we even saw this a couple times in the Senior Bowl. And I know the tackle got kind of blown up on the number of plays when he got pressured, but he just really lacks that peripheral awareness to be able to make that little movement, to be able to avoid that pressure, or just buy his tackle a little bit more time. Like, he just needs to multitask a little bit better of making his read, but also maintaining that protection in the pocket.
So when I think about Dart, I think one difference between Shedeur, Cam, and Dart is I should see Shedeur and Cam as being potential day one or let's call it, week 4 starters. I think Jaxson Dart needs to sit for I think he needs a full training camp, and I think he needs at least half to 3/4 of a season just to get his under center stuff right and to get some time getting that done. I'm sure he's working on that right now. But to me, I think he's a little bit of a longer fuse. I don't want to expose him too early. I would say Cam and Shedeur, I'm a little bit more willing to throw them in the fire maybe week 3, week 4, if I think that they're progressing. Jaxson Dart feels to me a little bit more like maybe week 13, maybe week 14 we see him. I just don't think there's a lot of upside to playing him in the opening day. I just don't see that for him. It's just funny because with him, I think there's a lot of potential there, but I also think that it could be ruined very, very quickly, and where he could get sacked out of the league. And actually, in my notes, it says this guy could get sacked out of the league. So we're on the same page with the troublesome under pressure type of thing. And I think that he needs to be protected from that. And that's part of the reason why I like sort of a play action run scheme, just so that he can hit those intermediate windows. And the yak stuff that he hits his receivers, good yak, plays right into that. So I could see him hitting like a medium sort of over route and nailing that throw. And a guy like Ayuk or a quick receiver can take that and scoot up the field real quick. Also, by the way, I just want to let you know that your grading system you have for quarterbacks, you have kind of short passes, medium passes, intermediate, deep. We actually have the same system.
Really?
For doing this, yeah. So I'm building it out for the NFL Read R data set. And I'm sure our pass lengths are sort of similar because we're trying to discriminate between like an 18-yard corner route and a 30-yard vertical. It's just really funny to see somebody else do this the exact same way. I think that's also part of the reason I was like, this guy sees the same thing that I do. Because I was like, hey, you have it kind of layered that way. Somebody who played quarterback, I really appreciate the difference between those throws. So it's just funny to see. But like with Dart, the intermediate throws really got me excited. I thought he feathered in some of the nicest throws out of anyone in the class. I think him and Ward, they both can hit tight window throws. It's just a little bit different in the way that they do it. And I think that some of Jaxson Dart's methods of doing so is a little bit translatable to the pro level on like a schematic basis as opposed to an improvisation basis. I think that Dart's, like for Cam, the short passing game gets me excited. That quickness, that laser, just go up the field real fast with a lot of tempo. Dart's a little bit more like, a short pass and then 18-yard over route or corner route or tight end in the seam. It's a little bit of a different style throw, but I think it does fit a little bit more. So once again, like what coaches look for, what type of throws they think are the most challenging throws. He checks off some of those most challenging kind of throw boxes in terms of NFL perception of the field. Like how do you throw it over and beside and things like that. So that's kind of why I like Dart. Just curious for you, where do you have Dart ranked in the class? Is he your number 3?
Yeah, he's my number 3. I will say there's a fair gap between Dart and then Shedeur as my QB2. So it's not something where I've seen more people try to say like it's a very close race between the 2 and the 3, and I'm not there. I definitely can understand betting on the upside that Dart shows, but I'm just concerned about the processing and just like you said, I think they're just very dependent on where he goes and how fast they rush him into playing. Because if they throw him in like early in the season or even week 1, like I said, I think it's going to be a disaster. I think it's going to be Zach Wilson 2.0. Like he needs to sit. Like like you said, the majority of the year, I'd even say the full year. Like I think you can throw him in like maybe the last few games of the season, just see where he's at and kind of build an offseason plan around that experience. But I think if you throw him in week 1, like you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah, I think also you kind of look at like the percentages of being good, medium, average. Like I think that Shedeur and Cam both have a lot of good, like slightly above average projections. Maybe Cam has some really great projections, but I also see a world where Shedeur is really, really good. And I think that this is something that's just funny when I think about upside with players, in that I think there is a world where Shedeur becomes a really, really good NFL quarterback. I think that there are teams that are going to find a way to do that. There's a path there. I think with Dart, there's more lower possibilities. There's a lot of like variance. Like there's a lot of percentage that he could be really bad, and then there's some percentage that he could be really, really good. But there's not as much in between. I think with Shedeur, like we're a little bit more comfortable with his baseline ability level. Maybe we don't not people don't necessarily see that high ceiling. I kind of see a path to that high ceiling. With Dart, it's easy to see the path to the high ceiling, but there's kind of also something where he kind of fails pretty spectacularly. So I think that's kind of how people feel with Dart. I don't know if that's how you feel, but that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think, like you said, I think a lot of people it's a little bit easier to see that upside with Dart, especially when it comes to extra scrambling ability and a little bit more like deeper targets. But I think, like you said, I think where a lot of people are writing off Sanders' upside and just saying like, oh, he's just a Teddy Bridgewater type quarterback because he doesn't have like the strongest arm, which like, yeah, he doesn't have the strongest arm, but he's also incredibly accurate that he can complete any throw he really needs to. And if he does go to a system where that issues with the sack is not an issue and he's able to get good protection, then all of a sudden you have a guy with a good floor and at least really good accuracy to keep an offense going. Whereas Dart, like you said, we need to worry about how he handles pressure. We need to worry about how he handles being under center. We need to worry about how he handles reading the defense. Like there's a lot that we don't have answers to Dart with the system he was in and how they operated in Ole Miss. So again, just probably will come down to how interviews go, how coaches feel his IQ is as a player, and just I don't know. He's the most interesting player to see where he ends up going for me.
Yeah, I agree. When I look at the teams on the draft, there's one team that really stands out to me where I think he could go and have a lot of success. And that team is the Miami Dolphins. I think that McDaniels has shown a really good ability to kind of coach the timing of an offense, and he like to throw these like intermediate throws, timing related throws that they've built a sort of, I would say, I'm not going to say a brainless quarterback offense, but a crutch oriented offense, and I think it worked really well for Tua because they played to his timing and anticipation. And I think that McDaniels understands the DNA of his quarterbacks well, and I think that might be the right fit at 13. I think Dart on the Dolphins. It sounds good, obviously, Dart to the Dolphins, but I actually think that McDaniel's the right coach. I think he's not going to be too tough on him. He's going to let him make some mistakes. They play in warm weather, so that's always nice. So they have a dome also. So to me, I look at the Dolphins at 13, and maybe I don't think Dallas will take him, but like maybe Dallas too. But I like him to the Dolphins. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I can see why other teams at the top will be like a little scared to take him in that top 10. But I think at 13, the risk reward might be just right.
Yeah, I think the fit would be fantastic for him to go to the Dolphins. I think especially if I remember right, I think the Dolphins had the highest play action rate in the NFL last year. I think the big thing is they had to extend Tua because I mean they didn't really have a good backup option, but I think just with him being under contract for so long, I think that kind of makes it a little more difficult to take a quarterback that early. But at the same time, I guess we just saw the Falcons take Michael Penix after signing Kirk Cousins, so anything is possible. But yeah, I think personally, I would be nervous about taking Dart in the first round. I think just because there's just so much risk, and also there's just the fit is just going to be so important. But I mean, at least in terms of like early second round teams, like I think we just need something that has like a good system around him. Like I think if he is there for Dallas in the second round, I don't think it'd be a bad choice to be able to develop a quarterback. I mean, we just saw how not having to rely on Cooper Rush kind of tanked the Cowboys season. And if Jerry Jones is willing to throw, I think, a 4th rounder or a 3rd rounder for Trey Lance, like, I mean, I think he'd jump at the opportunity to take a player like Dart in the second.
Yeah, I think that Dallas is an interesting destination. You know, teams that have quarterbacks, but maybe are kind of 1 foot out the door. So Dallas, just they happen to be next to each other in the draft, but Dallas and Miami kind of fit that halfway out the door on their current starter kind of situation. So I think that's, and also teams that like could really use the cap relief. I mean, the Cowboys could really use the cap relief. Everybody could, obviously. But
yeah.
Dallas can definitely be looking forward to that. All right, so I think we covered Jaxson Dart. We're going to start a new recording, actually. So we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll have part 2 with our last 3 quarterbacks. So stay tuned, everybody. There will be another episode coming out as part 2. It'll be coming out tonight as well. I just want to break it up, give us a chance to get a drink, take a quick break, and then we'll be right back.